Welcome to this video. My name is Matt Otwell and today I'm going to show you how to compress a snare drum. Now, compressing a snare drum is a really useful skill to learn because compression is quite difficult to hear if you're a beginner, and when you compress a snare drum the results are really audible. So it's a great way to learn compression, and of course compressing a snare drum is a really useful skill for sound engineers. Engineers use snare drum compression to create aggression. So if you're recording rock music, then this is going to be a very useful skill for you. Of course, it's not always necessary to compress a snare drum. There are many genres of music that don't require it, jazz for example, but you're almost certainly going to find a use for it if you want to create high energy drum tracks. And that can be with electronic music production, rock, metal, any other genre where you want to create an impact. So I programmed a drum pattern in Logic and I'm using BFD as my drum plugin. I've got the snare drum on an individual mixer output from the plugin. Most drum plugins output a stereo signal, so you'll need to insert a stereo compressor on that channel, but of course mono will work just as well. Oh, by the way, if you've recorded a snare drum with multiple mics, perhaps you've got one on the top, one on the bottom to capture the rattle of the snare, perhaps a distant mic as well, you may well want to sum these to a bus in your mixer so you can insert the compressor across all of those individual feeds. You can use an outboard compressor if you like, but because I suspect most of you will be using plugins for your drums, I'm going to do this with the BFD drum plugin. And the choice of compressor is not that critical, but you do need one that has a reasonably fast attack because we're going to be squashing the transient of the snare drum. Now, snare drums have two tonal components: the transient when the stick hits the skin and the rattle of the snare as the sound decays. These components have very different timbres. The transient is far louder than the decay, and the purpose of compression is largely to equalise this disparity and make the snare sound bigger. So what we're going to do is we're going to bring up the decay so that the snare sounds like it's a longer sound, if you like. Now, because we will be altering the relationship between the transient and the decay over a very short time frame, the effect is more tonal shaping than dynamic control. If you imagine you've got these two components, the thwack of the stick on the skin and then the rattle of the snare, well, normally that thwack, if you like, is the louder part of the sound, and we're going to be raising the rattle up. Now that's going to deceive the ear into hearing a very different sound, so you're going to hear quite a marked change in the tone of your snare drum. Okay, so let's put this theory into practice, and I've got a Logic project open here. I've got some drums that I've already programmed in, so if I just unmute those and I'll play those to you. Now you can probably hear there that the kick drum has got quite a lot of ambience on it. The snare drum does not have a lot of ambience on it. It's completely dry. And what I've done is that inside my plugin, which is BFD, let me open it up, I've got a kit here, and the snare drum I'm outputting on an individual channel into an individual track or an individual channel on my mixer here, and that's completely dry. The rest of the kit has got ambience on it within the plugin. There are ambient microphones that you can turn on. I've got quite a lot on the bass drum, which works within the context of the mix, but at the moment there is nothing on the snare drum. If I just go back here and turn it on again, so you can clearly hear there the snare is very dry. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to solo the snare drum, I think. So there's my snare drum soloed. I'm going to open up BFD again here. We can see it's being triggered here. Right here we've got snare bottom, snare top, and the output of the snare is on this channel here, I believe. Now you can hear that that is a very, very dry sound. There's a little bit of room ambience on it, I think, perhaps. But what I'm going to do is, and I think this is the first time you're going to see how transformative compression is, Oh, I've got some toms there. I can mute those in a minute. I'm going to turn my compressor on. There's without the compression. There's with it. And you can hear that the decay of the snare drum has been brought right up and the transient pushed down. Now if I change the threshold here, the compression is way too much. If I go the other way, we're back to a very loud transient and a very fast decay. This seems to be about good to me. Yeah, that's good. If I change my attack, you can hear that the transient is smeared. That's way too fast with the compression, so I'm going to put my attack back to about 5 milliseconds. My ratio here is on 4:1, so this is pretty good. Just turning off again here and on again. I find that I need to put a little bit more treble on it as well. So I'm going to turn on an EQ. Let me turn the compression off. I've now got some EQ on here and I'm rolling off some low end below 100, maybe below 200 hertz, something like that. I've got a bit of middle I've taken out. There's a bit of boxiness in the snare drum I don't like, and I've added a bit of air up here. Let me turn the EQ off. Let's put the compressor back on. Now the other thing that's a really important aspect of this, as I said, I've got this very ambient kit and big bass drum. I therefore need to add ambience onto my snare drum. I've got a snare drum reverb. Now let's turn this one on. I've actually got a Waves TrueVerb plugin here. Any snare reverb will do. This is a non-linear reverb. That is, it's a very large room, but I've artificially decreased the decay, so it cuts off artificially fast. In a large room, this snare reverb would go on for several seconds, but that will swamp the drum track and make it sound way too, what's the word, ambient. So this is non-linear. Non-linear means artificially curtailing the decay of the drum in a way that wouldn't happen in the real world. I like this reverb. This is a Waves TrueVerb plugin, but you can use anything, doesn't matter. Now that's quite an artificial sound, so I've added in some room reverb with it. And that just adds in the kind of ambience that's on the rest of the kit. Now if I go back to my recording here, I should say my other instruments, and I'm just going to re-enable them. So you can hear that the snare and the kick work fine together. Whoops. There's my hi-hats. My ride cymbals. Now you can clearly hear the effect of the compression on the snare. Let me go back and take it off so you can hear it turned off in the context of the drum part. Let me just go back here and turn on some other instruments. So here's the bass. Now it's beginning to make sense. And of course the guitars. Now you can really hear the mix working. Let's take that compression off again. Hopeless, isn't it now? That's no good for rock music. So there it is. There's a good demonstration of compressing a snare drum for rock music. Okay, we're almost done here, but there's one final thing I forgot, and that is I forgot to talk about the release settings for the compressor. Our release settings need to be around about 10 milliseconds. So we need the compressor to let go after it's compressed the transient to allow the decay to come up in volume. So let me just go through the settings once more. We had ratio on 4:1. We had attack nice and fast on 5 milliseconds. We don't want it too fast though. And we've got the release on 10 milliseconds. The threshold you're going to have to decide dependent on the plugin you are using and also of course on the actual snare drum sound. Now all of those figures are ballpark figures, but they should get you to the place where you need to be in terms of making your snare drums aggressive for rock music. I'm almost done. It only remains for me to say that if you want to hear more of how I use compression on snare drums, you can listen to some of my music at mattotwell.com and of course on Apple Music and Spotify and all the usual streaming services. I'll be back soon with another video, so thank you very much for watching.